Hi everyone, so this lesson is on the role and powers of the Prime Minister. Next lesson we will look at each Prime Minister in turn and look at them in lots of detail, and you'll be making a portfolio of examples. So this is just to sort of lead us into doing that. So firstly we need to identify the key functions of the Prime Minister, which we have already done, so that will be a bit of a recap. Then we're going to look at the sources of the Prime Minister's power and look at their formal powers and informal powers. So our literacy target is to use key political terminology effectively and to be precise with the language that we're using. So what are the main functions of the Prime Minister? Just to recap, the main functions are Chief Policy Maker, Head of Government, Commander-in-Chief of the Army, Chief Government Spokesperson, and Chief Foreign Policy Maker. So if we can't remember what these ones mean, we need to go back to the first lesson that we looked at, where we defined all of these different roles and functions. All of the information is also in the textbook, so go back to that lesson if you don't remember doing this. Oh yes, and parliamentary leader. So where does the Prime Minister gain authority and power from? So pause the clip here and try and just figure out what do each of these different images represent. So each one represents one place where the Prime Minister gets their authority from or their power from. Okay, so just pause and have a go at doing that before pressing play to find the answers. So the answers, the first one hopefully we got, was the monarch and prerogative powers. So the Queen gives the Prime Minister authority. So when there's been a general election and there's a clear winner, the leader of the party that has won will go to Buckingham Palace and will ask the Queen if they can form a government. So the monarch gives some of the power to the Prime Minister, and those royal prerogative powers that we looked at before also come from the monarch. This one represents the party, so their party gives them power because each party elects a leader, and that leader, if the party wins, becomes the Prime Minister. So the Conservative Party has given Boris Johnson power by electing him to be their leader, and obviously when they win a general election, he automatically becomes the Prime Minister as the leader of the party. This one, the public also give the Prime Minister authority, so the popular mandate. So remember, not all of the public vote for the Prime Minister because only those that live in the Prime Minister's constituency directly vote for them. But we can say that the public accept the political system that we currently have, and they accept that the leader of the winning party will become the Prime Minister. Next, we can say Parliament. Parliament also gives the Prime Minister authority. They recognise him or her as a parliamentary leader, and they recognise their role in the House of Commons. Patronage is another. So the Prime Minister has the power of patronage and has authority based on their power to hire and fire people in their government. So the Prime Minister is able to use their patronage to select who gets to have a ministerial position. And the last one is the one that we looked at last lesson, collective responsibility. So the Prime Minister gains power through collective responsibility because they are able to ask those that disagree with them to resign, or in serious cases they may sack somebody if they fail to adhere to collective responsibility. So there are some informal powers of the Prime Minister because not all powers are enjoyed by all Prime Ministers. Some powers may only exist in certain circumstances. So I want you to think about what factors may affect a Prime Minister's ability to exercise informal powers. So some of these powers are things like making government policy, being a leader in Parliament, their ability to control their cabinet, and their ability to be a national leader. So there are many factors that could affect their ability to do all of these jobs. So it might be things like, if the government was experiencing, or if the country was experiencing a recession, that might lead to the Prime Minister being limited in their ability to make any policy they want, because obviously if we're in some sort of economic crisis, they might not have enough money to be able to implement all the policies they want. They might not have strong national leadership if there might be some sort of faux pas, or there might be some sort of scandal that means that the public doesn't trust the Prime Minister. If the Prime Minister has a poor track record, that they might not be able to lead the nation effectively. In terms of controlling their cabinet, this can all be down to maybe just their personality or who they're friends with. If they've got lots of allies in their cabinet, they might be able to easily control their cabinet. Whereas if they've got lots of foes or people that don't necessarily agree with them all the time, it might be more difficult to get them on side and get them to agree with the Prime Minister. So obviously, yeah, when answering this question, just refer to some of those things that I've just talked about. And then if you could please go to page 250, and it talks about that role, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. Again, in lesson 1 I did mention how that role had changed over time, but I want you just to remind yourself and write an answer to that question using that information there. It should only be 1 or 2 sentences. So how the Prime Minister selects the Cabinet. So there are several strategies the Prime Minister could take when deciding who to have in their Cabinet. Firstly, they could pack the Cabinet with their own allies, so people that are friends with them, people they know that are going to be on their side. Secondly, they could choose to pick a balanced Cabinet, one that reflects policy tendencies from across the party. So they might pick some that are very right-wing, some that are more centre ground, some that are against them, some that are neutral, to kind of get a mixed picture. Or, number 3, they could pick a cabinet of the best possible people according to their talents. So they might not care about whether their position is in favour of them or not. They might just pick people that have experience. So they might pick somebody who has lots of experience in business to perhaps lead up areas to do with finance and business. So maybe the Department for Business, or it might be that they ask them to lead in terms of the Treasury, or they might ask them to be the Chancellor. So they might pick people, based on the talents and things that they have done prior to being an MP. So what I want you to do is to give a strength and weakness of each strategy. So why is it good to have allies? Why is it bad to have a cabinet full of allies? Why is it good to pick a cabinet that reflects the party more generally, and why is it bad? So in number 2, think about, for example, Theresa May had some people in her cabinet who were very pro-Brexit and others who were very anti-Brexit. So why might it be a good idea, if you're a Conservative Prime Minister, to have, a bit of both in your cabinet? Okay, so have a go at doing the strengths and weaknesses for all 3. The next thing I would like you to do is to look at how the Prime Minister selects their cabinet in terms of these factors. So factors governing the Prime Minister's selection of ministers. Give an example. They're all in the textbook, so you need to log on to the Pearson Active Learn textbook, and the login details are on the previous slide. So the examples part is quite important. If you can't find the example, then obviously you can do a little bit of research through using the internet, or if you're really stuck, you can just email me. But for sure, all of the explanations are there and the factors. If you are having trouble logging into Pearson to access the online textbook, then let me know and I'll help you out. So then we've got the relationship between the Prime Minister and the Cabinet. So over time, different Prime Ministers have different relationships, either strong relationships, weak relationships, either very dominant relationships and controlling relationships. And this has changed over time. So use your physical textbook, so the Neil McNaughton textbook that I gave you, the one that you've all got a copy of, and look up these page numbers 253 to 254, and read about how the different Prime Ministers have different relationships with their cabinets. Now you might already know something about this, because in the previous lesson I asked you to watch that clip called Cabinet Confidential, and that gave you some clues about Tony Blair and his cabinet, and John Major and his cabinet, and also Margaret Thatcher and her cabinet. So you might know some of the information already, but I want you to create a timeline from around the 1960s onwards, and just have what the name of the Prime Minister is and when they were in power, and then what their relationship was like with their cabinet. Did they lead their cabinet in a very sort of dominant way, or did they have a very sort of negotiating and sort of collegiate relationship with their cabinet? So then I would like you to answer these questions about how the relationship changed during the coalition in 2010 to 15. So why were disputes inevitable in a coalition? So remember just that a coalition is when more than one party is leading. So in this case, it was the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats. So why is it disputes are inevitable? If coalition partners disagree on policy, what role does the cabinet serve? What should it do? And why do you think that Cameron had an inner cabinet? And again, you might know the answer to that already from that article that I asked you to read in the previous lesson about David Cameron and his cabinet, and how he had what was known as the Quad, the two Liberal Democrats and himself and another Conservative MP who kind of worked together and had a smaller inner cabinet within the larger cabinet. So what purpose was that there to serve? So how do each of these external factors affect the amount of power the Prime Minister can exercise? So I already mentioned a recession about how, if we're in a recession, there's lack of money. It could mean that some of the policies they want to implement are too ambitious and they have to scale them back because they can't justify spending lots of money on them. The European Union is obviously one factor that was influential and did limit the power of the Prime Minister, arguably, but now obviously with Brexit and us leaving the European Union is less important. But think about when Prime Ministers were operating when the UK was in the EU. Think about how the EU might limit the Prime Minister's power. How do European laws tell the Prime Minister what they can and can't do? Then think about devolution. So this is quite relevant at the moment. You can see that Nicola Sturgeon in Scotland has been implementing different rules to the rest of the UK in terms of dealing with the pandemic. So how does that make Boris Johnson look weak? She has been trying to sort of release policy announcements before Boris Johnson, and sometimes that can make the Prime Minister look like he doesn't know what he's doing, or that he's not thought about policies as much as she has. So think about how devolution and the breaking up of the UK into devolved regions can limit the Prime Minister's power. And then lastly, think about NATO. So NATO stands for North Atlantic Treaty Organisation, and that can affect the power of the Prime Minister, because in NATO there is an agreement that if one member state of NATO has a conflict, other member states will come and support them. And so this could mean that arguably the resources of the UK's military could be used in conflicts elsewhere, and the Prime Minister may be pressured into supplying our military to other conflicts around the world to support NATO partners. So obviously that can limit the power the Prime Minister has. If you don't know much about NATO, if you've done history before, you might know quite a bit about them. But if you don't, just have a look at their website so you can see what kind of work that they do. And lastly, all I'd like you to do is to recap the work by answering these questions. So if you just jot the answers down, they don't need to be long answers, just short, brief answers. If it's two functions, just bullet point the two functions and submit that on Show My Homework so I can see that you've understood the work. If there's any questions, then make sure that you attend the drop-in session so I can teach you some of this live and we can go through it together in more detail. Otherwise, just submit your work on Show My Homework for me to mark. Thank you. Bye.